The Why Me Project, an exclusive presentation of Faith Strong Today.
This is week number 4, Holly, of someone saying you need to talk to insert name here, as Carol was the one who said that we need to talk to Lesa this week.
Yes, and so we said, okay, Carol, your wish is our command, and voila, here we go.
Yeah, speaker, educator, gold medalist, Lesa Mayes-Stringer. How are you?
I'm doing well.
We like to ask the skill testing question because we never know where it's going to go. I know.
Don't worry, it's not hard, has nothing to do with math, because I wouldn't get the answer right.
One time, no.
Check Wikipedia.
That skill testing question is, who are you and where did you come from?
Oh, okay. So Lesa Mayes-Stringer. And so I was born in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, went to university in Toronto, York University, and then I went to university, Simon Fraser University, got my education. In the middle of all that, I was doing track and field at a high level, and went to Calgary from there, became a teacher, was approached to do bobsled, became part of the national bobsled team for about 9 years. Before moving to France. And then with my family, we lived there for 12 years. And now we are back in the West in Edmonton. And I love this city.
Yes.
That does answer a lot of questions, though, because, I mean, as a bobsledder and then growing up in Saskatchewan, there's not a lot of hills for you to really bobsled down. So I was like, how does this work?
Well, I actually, I have the trophy around someplace, but when I was 6, I did win the slide-a-thon. No, when I was in grade 6, the North Battleford slide-a-thon on King Hill. And I just found the trophy the other day. So we won trophies and we won chips and pop. That was like so exciting.
Yes.
With
always
Pamela
a winner.
Balance. Pamela Balance, I remember.
Oh, that's amazing. Good childhood memories. And but I'm guessing that didn't plant the seed for the eventual ending up in the bobsled team for the national level.
No, I think that I was driving it, though.
Yeah. I love that.
So, no, I actually, when I was approached to do bobsled, I literally turned them down 2 times flat out. I just said, like people like me don't do that sport. It's too cold. And so that was the first thing that I said. I was like, I kind of joked around like, that's too cold. And I really didn't want to be out in the cold. And then they approached me again and I said, oh, women do bobsled. Wow. I didn't realize that. But I still wasn't, open to it. And they kept approaching me because I have a heptathlon background. I did the heptathlon when I did track and field, and I did it at a high level. And so they like to approach heptathletes and decathletes because you need a lot of power to push the bobsled, power and like speed. And so that's why I was recruited in that way. So the third time, they just took me to dinner, to lunch. And that was really smart because I love food. So, that kind of softened things a little bit. And then I was listening a bit closer, I guess. But anyway, they said, just come to one of the tryouts, like the physical testing, just to see what it's all about. So I hadn't trained, I'd only been playing recreational volleyball and recreational basketball for about 7 years at that point, after all my competitive training for the heptathlon and other events. And so I wasn't in the greatest shape and hadn't done sprinting. So I don't know why I brought my spikes, but I did. I was sitting there. I guess I was deciding, am I going to do this? And so I was sitting there in the bleachers, and one of the coaches, Dennis Marinoy, came up to me and he said, why don't you just do a couple of the tests, So I'm like, okay. So I came down, put my spikes on. And after like the first 2, I felt like I had torn everything in my legs. It was really hard. It was like, jumps and sprinting, like all out sprinting. But then when we got the results, I ended up being first or second in all of those tests. And I was like, whoa. And I thought, whoa, I could actually make this team. Like if I train, perhaps, because you still had to push the sled. Yeah. There's one thing with physical testing, and there's another thing to push the sled. A lot of times it doesn't translate, the speed to the sled. So you have to be tested. And so I started doing all the training. I started getting a dream to, being able to compete for Canada, travel. I started to get really excited. And so I started training. I started really training hard so that when it came to all of the push training with the actual bobsled, it took a while. I had some injuries. I fell one time and really injured myself. I really knew nothing about the sport. I have something really, really embarrassing to share. Really embarrassing. The first time that I went to push the bobsled, the coach was showing me what to do. I literally knew nothing. So he pushed it and then he hopped in backwards to stop it. And so what did I do? I pushed it. I
hopped in backwards.
I had never seen anybody push. It was the first time. It was just me and him. I'd never, ever seen it in my life. And so, yeah, it's really embarrassing whenever I share that because, yeah. But anyway, what a fantastic experience to be part of the national team. I think I was a part of the team for 8 years, 8 or 9 years. Yeah, 8 years. Mm-hmm.
What is it like though? Because I mean, it's one thing to be a great athlete. It's one thing to be somebody who could sprint really quickly on ice and jump into a bobsled, but then it's a whole other thing to hurl yourself at hundreds of kilometers down an icy slope, trying to be the fastest one to do it. From like maybe your first time going down, what was that like for you?
Oh, my first time going down. Oh my goodness. So I, like I said, I didn't know anything about the sport. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, I want to drive that. I don't want to just be the pusher. I want to drive that. And so I said to the coach, I want to pilot. And then, it took me years and years to remember why he looked at me that way, kind of like, because I didn't know at the time that no woman had ever started out or man, people don't start out as pilots. Oh. You get the experience behind at first so that you can get used to the speed and all of the G-forces can be at 5-6 G-forces in certain corners. And so it's pretty intense. And so I didn't know any better. And so then my first time going down was in a driving school. So that means that somebody was learning how to pilot. So usually you go down behind someone, have some smooth rides, they kind of this is so nice and easy, you kind of get lulled into it. Well, I was behind someone who had never driven a bobsled before.
Oh, no.
And so we were like, boom, 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 all over the place. And they tell you beforehand, if you pull the brakes, it's a $500 penalty, like a fine, because you're going to wreck the ice. And so all I'm thinking, pull the brakes. Oh, it's a fine. Oh. And I prayed. I was, oh my goodness, stop this thing. I was terrified. It was the scariest situation. And then we get to the bottom and I pull the brakes and they break. The brakes break. It goes like this. And then we start going, we're going way up the hill and then it stops and we start going backwards and he starts to kind of steer it. And we end up on the dock. And so I was shaking. My whole body was shaking. And then I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness. Well, actually, someone ran up to me and they said, because at this point I had already had 2 children and 2 of my children. And so one of the people runs up to me, one of the officials says, Lesa, which is more difficult, bobsleigh or giving birth? And I said, bobsleigh. And in my head, I'm thinking, I'm nuts. I'm never coming back. And then she said, I'm so sorry. You can't go, you can't drive because the bobsled's broken. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, thank goodness, because I made a huge mistake.
Yeah. But your faith had never been stronger.
Yeah. I just went home and I prayed and I'm like, God, I don't know if you want me to do this. I don't know if you want to continue this sport. And I just wasn't quite sure if I was going to continue. Actually, I wasn't going to. I was going to call them and say I quit.
Yeah.
And I started to, I was up really late and because it was the evening and I watched a show and it was, I think Glenn, what's his name? He was an astronaut, Glenn something. He was part of the Apollo 13 and I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, so he was on the show, the Charlie Rose show. And it was between him and Neil Armstrong to go to the moon. And he talked about fear. So he was asked, how do you get over fear? And so my ears perked up like, yeah, how do you get over fear? And he said, you know what? The only way to get over fear is to face it. And each time you face it and you overcome it, then you become more fearless. And I thought, wow, that's so true. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to the moon. So I'll give myself 10 times. And if I'm still this petrified, then I will stop. And so, I carry that same attitude into my Christian walk, my walk with God, that when there's something that is really, I'm really afraid to do, I get on my knees, I pray about it. And then I just give it to God. If it's something that I know is good and right and noble that I should be doing, then I just ask God for help. And then I take that step. I won't say I'll do it every time, but let's just say most of the time. I'll take that step and it's like I'm walking off a cliff. But I can tell you that that's when I've seen the most amazing things happen in my life, is when I am doing something and I'm terrified and I'm doing it for God. So that's my experience. My first time going down the bobsled track was in a driving school.
That's wild. But it went much better moving forward, didn't it?
Yeah, I was so lucky. I was so fortunate. I actually did the driving school and then they needed me as a brake person. So I did that for a few months and then I went back to driving. And I think it was about 2 years later where, I ended up being the Canadian champion. So I was very thankful that, I stuck with it and I was able to have these incredible experiences and meet so many amazing people from around the world. I think I had about 250 people over to my house, athletes from all over the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When we had events, I would just invite everybody over and we'd have barbecues in the snow. And yeah, it was wonderful.
You made an interesting comment though, because you had said, "Oh, I didn't know that there was women bobsledders."
Yeah.
That is already one thing. What about women bobsledders who are of color? Was that something that you paved the way for? Was that something that was maybe brand new to that sport?
Well, it was usually if there was a Black person, they were usually a brake person. So everybody knew about the Jamaican bobsled team. So everybody would be like, yeah, good runnings every time they saw me, right? And I had never even seen the show. I hadn't seen the movie. And so I'm like, yeah. But it was kind of like a joke, right? Like a Black pilot. And so I remember, when I was in the push camp in the summertime and other countries coming to use our track and to do summer training in Calgary. And I remember this one country, people from the Netherlands, and they're walking by and they must have done it. I think they did it on purpose so that I could hear, but they just said, they can push, but they can't drive. And they knew that I was a pilot. And so I just kind of like, I'm not like a vengeful person. Like I'm a competitive person, but I'm not vengeful. And so I just kind of like thought about that. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting that they would say that. And I was just kind of not even aware of that. I didn't really look around me and see that there wasn't a lot of Black pilots. I wasn't cognitive of it. And then little by little, I started to get more aware, like, hey, like I'm the only, because so many people were joking about it with me, like not just people in the world, but bobsledders and stuff. Right. And kind of watching me. And so I started to kind of pick up on that. And so, I was the first Black Canadian, pilot, North American, I guess, to do World Cup, to win the, Canadian championships. Yeah. So it was something that was rare around the world. And so it was quite interesting, but it was one thing that I remembered. And this was about, I think it was that season or the season after I was trying to do my qualification for the Olympics, and that person who had those people who had said that to me, I was competing against them at a World Cup in Germany. And of course, I wasn't thinking about what they said at all. I was just like competing, like just focused on trying to do my best. And I had to have a certain position, like sixth or seventh. And so I was like just so anxious, and they were ahead of me, and it's 2 runs, and it's a total of the 2 runs. So it's the second run. They were ahead of me. I went, and then I'm waiting, and then so it goes from 10 to 1 on the second run. And so I was before them because I think I was 8th. And so they came after me, and then I beat them. It was years later, and I realized, oh yeah, I guess Black people can drive.
Yeah, that's something that is hard to reconcile sometimes, is just how people see your skin, and they make all these assumptions about you and your capabilities and how far you can go. Was this the first time that you had really experienced this level of racism, essentially, against yourself or people that you were with?
I think that I was kind of sheltered in Saskatchewan, or naive. I'm not too sure, or I didn't want to. So I grew up in a community where I think I was pretty like sheltered in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, because they loved our family. And so, we were treated very well. My brother, he played NFL football. He's a huge star, and he was always a star. So I think that helped pave the way for the rest of us, because, that respect. So, I mean, so I didn't really see it so much when I was younger. And then when I got to Toronto, it was different. When I went to university there, I just saw the different cultures. It was quite different. I received racism from some whites, but also from Blacks, because I was hanging with whites, because I hung out with whites, Blacks, Chinese, Native. Like I grew up that way. And so I started to get kind of like the other thing too. But definitely the worst for me was when I was on the national team, and it was around my, around 2005, we got a new coach, and he was discriminatory, racist, to my face. So it wasn't even like it was silent. It was like overt, saying things to me, saying, you're not going to go to the Olympics. I'm putting these other people on the team instead of you, even though I was, ahead of the other pilots by far. That was the worst thing that had happened to me in my entire life. It was traumatic. And, I prayed so much. I had to really get on my knees, and I just thought, oh, he's not going to win. God, it'll all be okay. It's not going to work out. But yeah, he did everything that he could in his power. And I didn't even know him. I had nothing against him. I'd never said one bad word. It was just me. And so, yeah, that was the worst experience that I went through. It was really hard. I learned a lot about David and Joseph during that part. That's what I studied out, and it helped me. It helped me through that.
Was faith a big part of your life growing up?
Yeah. It was something. I went to church every, Sunday. My family did. I always believed in God, and I always tried to live for God. So I did live very differently from the people around me. Like there's a lot of people who have come to faith, and they really were in the world, part of the world, things like that. I wasn't one of those people. I was one of those people who like always tried to, do what's right. When all my teammates were going out and getting the alcohol and drinking during our tournaments, I sat by myself in the hotel room, and I felt very lonely, and I would cry. It was really hard. That was as a teenager. And then as a university student, I, started to go to the parties, and I really tried to see, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've been wrong this whole time. So I went, I didn't get drunk, but I just wanted to see. And I did that for a while, and I just remember feeling like empty. I just thought, wow, like it's not here either. So where is it? And this is where, and when my, God reached out to me, I would say, like, woke me up and just kind of like grabbed my hand. And I just learned a lot about a depth, like I had a lot of self-righteousness, a lot of pride. Some people started studying the Bible with me and really teaching me basics about, Christianity, and my life radically changed. At that point, I was 19 years old, and it was the change for my life. I decided, no, I'm going to live for Jesus. He is Lord of my life from now on. And that was a decision that I made.
As you're navigating the bobsled world and the racism, I'm going to guess sexism as well, because we've also heard about is Kaylee Humphreys, is it? And her story as well. But how did your faith help you navigate that time of life and being in a situation where you're representing our country,
I know,
but yet the sport's treating you less than?
And it was the culture at the time. Athletes didn't have a lot of, there was just a lack of leadership. And so the coaches, if you had a coach that was bent a certain way, there just wasn't a lot of control over those coaches, especially when you traveled overseas. And so, I did face it all at the same time. It was like a triple whammy because I had children. Yeah. And so it was like bringing a baby carriage onto a football field, like, oh, how can a, mom do this? This is, a man's sport. So there was that. There was, what he said was, I'm not sending a married woman with children to Olympic Games to represent Canada. And then he would, tell this to everybody. And, but it was also because I was Black too, right? Navigating that, I just really, a lot of things can come up into your heart, right? Like, how dare you? Like, this is just so unfair. And, and I'm a proud Canadian. So, I did the Canada Day speech for Calgary South, and it was called My Canada, because my Canada's like a baby to me, right? And so for this to happen when I was on a national team, competing for my beloved country, to have this type of betrayal was the hardest, most difficult thing that I had ever faced in my life up to that point in my life. And I felt betrayed. Yes. And so I just had to, dig into the scriptures. Don't pay back. God will do it. Like, don't take revenge, my friend. Romans 12, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. I just had to memorize all those things. Look at Joseph, look at David. How did they handle those things? And just really put my heart out there and cry out to God and be honest and be open, but just deal with that with God and me. So my faith helped me a lot to get a bitter heart during that time.
You have this love for Canada so much, then why did you end up leaving? Why move and go to the other side of the world? Yeah, because of this. I was in this situation with my family. We were hurting, and I was asked to help and rebuild the program for France, for l'Équipe de France, for bobsled. And so they called me over there because it was not like a thing that was, it was I was publicly humiliated. So all the nations knew what was going on. And so people they just protected me, honestly. Like, so, France did that. And then the top Swiss, who was a top a bobsled maker at the time, he made me my bobsled for me and practically gave it to me.
Wow.
And then Monaco helped out a lot. The coach from Monaco helped me. So there's France, Monaco, Switzerland, and then Germany. They also took us under their wings and just guided us in every single way to support me and my team. So it was really a world thing, just because it was really bad what happened, because he did it publicly while I was competing, while I was on the starting line, everything. It was bad. So yes, so we ended up going to France, only planned to stay for a few years. And we ended up staying for 12 years. And that was because with the church there, we wanted to help to encourage the church. It was not doing well. And we wanted to, my husband and I, we were like, well, we don't know a lot, but we can encourage. We know how to encourage. So let's do that. So we thought it'd be like a couple of years. Well, it turned into 12 years. And in the meantime, my daughter, Madison, she ended up, all of our children, they went to school there. They know 3 languages. And, and she ended up competing for France. And she became the world champion for junior world champion for France a couple of years, cool. Competing for France a few years ago. And so that's why we ended up going to France. And I think I needed it for some healing, some time for healing and perspective as well. It wasn't all of Canada. It was a few people in Canada who did this.
So why did you come back?
Everybody says Edmonton. Why did you come back to Edmonton? Long story. Lots of things happened in our lives. So many great things. So many wonderful things. And in 2015, my husband was diagnosed with brain cancer. So an inoperable and untreatable brain cancer on the top of his brain stem. And it's the rarest. They have never seen anything like this ever. So he was given anywhere from any day to 2 years to live. So that means for 24 hours a day, we didn't know if he was going to die, because of where it's located. It's located at the point where it controls your heart, your lungs. So if it grew, then he would die. There was nothing they can do. And so we lived with that kind of stress and, tension and literally walking through the valley of the shadow of death 24/7. So once a year he would get an exam. They would do an MRI once or twice a year, actually twice a year. And so what they found finally was that it was growing. And then when we found out, it stopped growing. When we all started praying, it stopped. That was the only way he would survive. It had to stop. And I can tell you, my prayer was, God, you have decided to take my husband. Because we had so many specialists looking at this. They all said the same thing. Just enjoy the life that you have left on this earth, to my husband. And so I prayed, God, you have decided to take my husband, and I'm asking you to change your mind. And I reasoned with him. There's few people in the Bible who had asked for extra years, and there was, so I just said, God, you've created us. I know a lot of people have had these prayers, and, you've created us, you made us. I know that you can, you have the power. So I know that you can do this. It's up to you. But this is my request. And I also requested, I'm not like one of those people who ask for 15 years or 10 years. I'm asking for a long life together to old age and a normal life together into old age. And so my husband's symptoms were quite severe. A lot of shaking his hand and his foot, and just 7, 8, or 9 side effects. So it was quite severe. He was sleeping around 19 to 20 hours a day. And this went on for about 4.5 years while we were in France. And so finally he kept one of his smart neurologists or neurologist. He said, Mr. Stringer, or neurosurgeons. He said, Mr. Stringer, we're going to try something. Why don't you try this drug? We don't know if it's going to work, but give it a try. And so, he tried this drug, and it's for Parkinson's. And because the area is the same area as Parkinson's, but it's not Parkinson's, it's like a synthetic dopamine. So he tried it immediately. It had positive effects. Now it's not doing anything to help the tumor, but it was helping the side effects. And so within 2 days, he was almost normal, sleep patterns, everything. His life completely changed. And of course, for the entire family, it changed all of our lives. And so thank goodness, so you can imagine how hard this was on our children as well. So as a family, it was extremely difficult. So we're a prayerful family, and we had been up to that point, and we were very, we did devotionals once or twice a week. And so we were a very, Christ-centered family, and definitely drew us closer to God, understanding. You think a lot about heaven. You think a lot about what it's going to be like. It changes you, or either become bitter or you just become better. And so, you go through your struggles, your ups and downs, through all of that, all the emotions and everything, really struggling with God through the wilderness. So then at about 5 years afterwards, just before, it was like around March, just before COVID, of 2020, finally one of them said, it just hasn't grown. And they said, they all decided together as a group, because there was about 20 on his case. And they just said, Mr. Stringer, we are considering that it has stopped. It's not going to grow any longer, and you're going to live a long life. And, before that, when my husband was ill, I had started a school. I have a school in France called Loving English. So we go in, we do programs for different schools in France. We have about 600 students, and I have a lot of different teachers. And so I was doing my career, he was doing his career. He was able to go back to work and do his career. And, but while he was ill, I said to Chris, do you want to go back to Canada? And he decided, no, we're going to stay here. And, because we had wanted to do a lot of, humanitarian work. We had started doing humanitarian work. So I used to, I organized a lot of, operas in castles. I know it sounds crazy.
No, it's amazing.
Sounds awesome.
I know.
In France, to raise money for our humanitarian projects. So we put in a well in Africa, a free healthcare clinic in Togo, Lomé, in a poor section of the city, and then a huge project in Bangladesh with a school. So he decided, and we decided together, this is what we want to do. Really pour our hearts and our time into these humanitarian projects, and not knowing if he's going to die, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. He started Hope Worldwide France, and Hope Worldwide is international, serves like millions, about 1 million people a year. It's, and so France didn't have one. So we did Hope Worldwide France. And so that's what we did. We kept our jobs. We kept helping out with the church, and we focused on raising money and kind of helping to oversee these projects through France and Bangladesh, not knowing how many days or years my husband would have on this earth. And so, that was during the time. And then, afterwards, during the time, that's when we found out that they said that he's going to live a long life. So for myself, I was busy with my school and serving all these different people. And I just saw how so many of these people that I was serving, I just started to feel like my talent is being used for the world. Like I want to use it 100% for God, like all the different things that he's given me. Mm-hmm. I wanted to use it like more specifically, full time. So I was thinking in my head, working full time for Hope. That's what I was thinking. So I started looking into it, asking questions, seeing if there's job openings. I wanted to work full time for Hope Worldwide for the humanitarian missions, focus on that. What I didn't realize was that God was preparing me for the full-time ministry. I always said, I'll never do that. I'll be like right-hand person. I'll help out.
Yeah.
I will never work full-time in the ministry. Like that was a never. God just like made such a joke out of that. So he was preparing me to work full-time in the ministry. And so here, what happened is, we've been asked many times, go full-time in the ministry. It was no. Like we were asked again, May 2020, on the phone, you guys should, think about going into the ministry. My husband and I had never talked about doing the ministry, and we looked at each other at the same time and we both did this. Yes, we were ready at exactly the same time to go full time. And so we said yes. And so we were hired by Edmonton to come here to lead the church. And this is what we've been doing now for, it'll be 3 years, September 1st. And so this is why we came back to Edmonton. And it's great. We're also closer to our families, his family, my family. That's a lot of them still in Saskatchewan. And we're able to work with these amazing people here in the church in Edmonton, the capital city church.
Family is so important to you. And I know we want to talk about why me moments. I want to dive into that. I'm trying to see what time we're at. But I am also really curious about your family because if you check out your Wikipedia page, it's quite interesting. You do have one. You have quite
it could all be fake, Holly.
That's true. That's true. But there's something about being Black in Canada, and I'm mixed, and so I don't know anything about my Black heritage except for my dad was from Trinidad. They were slaves. I might have also had some, Trinidadian, indigenous, or Venezuelan. It's just not known, but you have a beautiful history that, your lineage is quite impressive. So do you mind sharing a little bit about where you came from? Because it sounds like what you've been through now, that warrior spirit, it came from somewhere. So where did it come from?
I definitely think that, my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather, Joseph and Maddie Mayes, he was the minister of a church in the southern United States in Oklahoma, and they were both slaves. He was a slave in Georgia, and so was my great-grandmother. In fact, her slave owner was Hiram Warner. He was the head of the Supreme Court of Georgia, and he was a congressman. He was fighting to keep slavery in the United States. That was her master. And so they were freed. And so there was Jim Crow laws. There were so many horrible things that were still going on. And she had they had 13 children, a lot of boys. They were in danger. And there's just a lot of things that were just not right. And so they asked the congregation, when you think about going to Canada, they received the information that Canada was sending out in that time because Canada was trying to populate Western Canada. And so they were sending flyers and things and people all over the world to try to get people to come. It wasn't supposed to go to the ex-slaves, the freed slaves, but it did. And so he and my great-grandmother, they led up a lot of families from Oklahoma to Saskatchewan. And they ended up homesteading. It's called North of the Valley by Maidstone, Saskatchewan, which is close to North Battleford, where I grew up. And so she was a midwife. They started a church called the Shiloh Church. It's a historical monument there right now for Saskatchewan. And but she delivered babies, so she was equal. I guess she treated everyone equally. The whites, the natives, the blacks. She delivered all their babies. She would go and visit them, hang out. She didn't hold hostility in her heart. And I think that's what we learned, was that even if things are terrible, if you're treated terrible, don't be hostile. Mm-hmm. Treat people right, leave it to God. So that's where probably that sort of thing, doing things, even if it's a little bit scary, and doing things like having integrity. I think that's really deep in my family, integrity, doing things right. And then for me, I had to learn how to do things for the right reason. And so, so I'm very proud of, very thankful to be part of, that heritage, and to have people like my great grandparents, especially Maddie, as an example to follow.
Can you share with us a why me moment, whether it be in the hill or a valley of your life?
Yes. For bobsled, it was both, you're talking about why me moments on the hillsides, you're saying on the mountains.
Mountaintops or the valleys, yeah.
Yeah, so I've been both in bobsled. On the mountaintop, I've had the why me on the mountaintop, literally.
Yeah.
You start on the top of a mountain, you go down really fast in the bobsleigh, and then the valley. In the same sport. And I shared the one earlier with the racism and just discrimination. that was something that was extremely difficult. And so when I came back to Canada, I'll share about that one because I never shared that story. In fact, this is the first time that I'm actually sharing this publicly. I had a lot of media ask me what happened, why are you in France? Like, what happened, Lesa? And I didn't want to share. I wasn't ready. And I don't think Canada was ready. I don't think Canada, I literally thought Canada won't believe that this is happening in Canada. And now that things have become more, open and people have talked more, when I came back to Canada, it was God, I guess the Spirit's just saying like, now's the time to speak. So, I had athletes in the national team contact me and ask me to help them because it was still going on. And the president at the time contacted me. We talked for 10 hours and I decided I was going to do whatever I could to help these athletes. And so I did behind the scenes. And my goal was to have a change for all of Canada to protect athletes. And so that did happen a few months later where, I'm not going to say I was the only one in that, but the bobsleigh athletes did talk about it. Things, they decided to go public and it caught the attention of other teams. Other teams went public, caught the attention of the Minister of Sport. And then she had an emergency meeting, put in place safe practices. And every single national team has to be part of that to protect athletes. Otherwise, they cannot get supported by the federal government. That was July 1st of last year. And so did my warrior spirit come out? Yes, absolutely. Because, I wanted to help. I wanted to help these people, not in a combative way, but in a non-violent, smart way. I gave them support with finding lawyers for them and strategy and just support, emotional support. And so I would say that was a mountaintop experience that happened because of the Valley.
Her and her husband involved in Capital City Church of Christ, Love in English, Hope Worldwide France, at Lesa Stringer on the Insta. I'm so glad that Carol said, we got to talk to you. And Lesa, this has just been absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's been wonderful to meet you. And thank you for doing this for so many people across Canada. I'm really thankful that you're doing this. It's going to help people in their faith. And so thank you for this. Thank you for you.
Thank you, Lesa, for saying yes.
Yes.
And my goodness, what an amazing woman.
I know, an amazing family. Hearing about her husband was a lot. And just seeing what they've been through, but to see their positivity and how they're still serving God in such a meaningful way in Edmonton. I love it. It's just such an inspiring story and just grateful that she took time to speak with us today.
We've had a lot of husband and wives on our podcast. I think now we got to reach out to him and see if we can get him on and kind of get his perspective of things.
Yes, let's do it. So we're putting that out there.
Yeah. Thank you to everybody who has been a part of this. We are coming up on 300 episodes. We are trying to grow all the socials, especially our YouTube, Holly.
Yeah, exactly. So make sure you check us out. It's Why Me Project Podcast on YouTube. Also, I think it's that on all the other social media platforms as well, except for Twitter. It's Why Me Project. But please follow us, subscribe, rate, review. We would love to hear from you in all those capacities. And let's just keep growing this together.
Yeah, we appreciate all of the projectors. Check it out. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Edify, and faithstrongtoday.com.